WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. We are positively into, is this like week 12 of the baseball lockout or really week 2? I'm trying to figure that out. Luke Jones joins us now. Of course, our friends at Royal Farms, where the mocha is still flowing and the Western fries are still, Royal Farms don't take the chicken away just because they're not playing baseball. And John Harbaugh and Eric DaCosta are not lamenting the fact that the Red Sox and the Tigers aren't playing this year. They're picking football players. Usually you and I spend a week in Indianapolis. You've done that trip with me more than like a handful of times, right? 3, 4, 5 times you've done that trip with me?
Yeah, at least 3 or 4, I would say. No,
Yeah,
I mean, not too many, but I've some.
I did it alone with my wife early on. I did it with Casey Willett. I think I took Glenn Clark one. I've taken different people, but I feel like I've been there 12 times. I don't feel like I miss anything anymore. You know what I mean? Like the first year I didn't go, I felt like, maybe should be there, whatever. Now it's the Underwear Olympics, and I see a bunch of sports writers posting pictures late at night from bars. But other than that, I from a media standpoint, I'm not saying there's no work being done. There's a ton of work being done. But I can hang out and stay away from this one. I'm going to the owners' meetings in 2 weeks. I think that's more significant given where the franchise is right now.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it just has to do with what do you really value in terms of who you're trying to cater to with your audience. I mean, there is a very sizable portion of football fans who are absolutely nuts about the NFL draft, and that's great. And for those types, they're seeing the 40 times. They're seeing who tests well. They're seeing who doesn't test, and you're waiting with anticipation for pro days coming up here in the coming weeks. But there's a lot of interest in that, and you and I have met individuals over the years who are not really cover the league during the season type people. They cover the draft, and they're watching college football in the fall. And now this is their time of year where they can really shine, because unlike the rest of us who, and don't get me wrong, I watch college football, but I'm not studying it during the fall. But they are the ones who can not just tell you who's testing well, but they can give you context as far as, okay, I've watched this guy on tape a whole lot, and this is what to like, and this is what teams might not like about this guy. So, so that's fun. But again, there's that sense of going crazy over that, and then I think you have a lot of fans who are interested in that, but at the same time, knowing the Ravens are only going to come away with a small fraction of those players that are being talked about right now. So yeah, I mean, you kind of weigh what you value, what you're really interested in. And I think, you have draft Twitter, which is crazy. And I say that in an endearing way. But then you have a lot of people who are just a little more, okay, guys I've heard of, whatever college team I root for, I want to see them do well. Saw some Maryland guys test well over the weekend, but at the same time, kind of wait and see mode, because we could all remember the number of individuals who years ago at this time of the year were talking about in a very hyped kind of state, and then they end up not really being that guy at the next level. So you kind of wait it out. But to your point, there's definitely that. It's more than a niche. I'd say that. I mean, there's certainly more than a niche.
It's become an industry now.
Yeah.
Like literally.
Yeah,
like
no
I'm
question.
not. When I first went to my first Indy Combine, it was like 2005, 2006, and it was Phil Savage needling me and Eric DaCosta saying, you should come out, it's great. And it kind of was, but it was 120 media people, and it was Draftniks, it was Goose Goslin, it was Peter King, it was Mike Silver, it was getting stories, and it was a place to drink with executives and write stories about off seasons and new executives and executives taking over teams with vision to revamp their draft, or talk about new coaches in different places that got big. That's what it used to be. Boy, we've sort of zoomed past that, right? I mean, I think the Senior Bowl is now sort of the dip your toes in. By the time we get to this thing, it's become a multimedia thing. It's become a huge agent thing. And we talk about the agents breaking the COVID protocols about 3 weeks ago, when these guys were going to be getting served, I don't know, whatever they were serving Dave Sheinin in Beijing, if you missed that piece last week, robots serving food and hazmat suits, all that kind of stuff. I would just say this: we only get one pick in the first round, and there's something about me with DeCosta and the Ravens being that these guys have always done it, that I do have an in Eric we trust kind of thing where they put a lot of effort into this, a lot of resources in this. And when I talk to people from other teams and other places around the draft, they say the Ravens put more resources into this than a lot of other places do. And we all know the story. Cincinnati didn't have scouts 20 years ago, right? And they were using Joel Bushbaum's picks or whatever. But I think the Ravens really take this seriously because from the beginning, it's part of the DNA of the owner of the team who believes in picking personnel as everything. And I would find that to be true too, since I found you 13 years ago. So there.
Right. But yeah, I mean, I don't think you're going to hear Eric DeCosta talking in the same way that Les Snead did about picks. And hey, it worked for the Rams. And it will be interesting to see, because we know it is such a copycat league, although I'd say easier said than done staying as healthy as the Rams did the last couple of years in order for that to be possible in February. But it is interesting, and clearly the Ravens value the draft. And I think even Eric touched on this in his media session in Indianapolis. Look at something like the compensatory picks. I mean, the Ravens were really ahead of the curve there, but now you have a lot of teams that value compensatory picks. Now, it's not all 32, but you have more teams that are at least
on the
thinking
analytics of that, right? Like literally, like, hey, letting Ricky Wagner go and not giving him $60 million and getting the 108th pick in the draft, we'll do that, or whatever that compensation is. The Ravens were one of the first ones to do the math on it back when Billick would flippantly say to the media, it's out there in the cosmos somewhere. I have no idea how we're getting these supplemental picks. Nobody understood the supplemental picks, really.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's that terribly complicated. I think it comes down to this. Yes, you have to make very difficult decisions as it pertains to the salary cap. And typically the teams that do the best over the long haul are the teams that aren't overpaying. They're not paying good players great money. They're not paying decent players really good money. And you make those difficult decisions. And we've talked about the 80-20 rule. But you have that. And certainly you have the same idea as far as how you value other free agents, knowing how that factors into the compensatory pick formula. But I think it's a really simple principle, Nestor. It comes down to this. Even the best teams at drafting players know that they're not going to bat 1,000. So you're going to have misses. So the idea is, you're going to miss on some players and other teams are going to get lucky. And you're going to have some players that might have been the right pick, but for whatever reason, injury, off-field issues, different things that you aren't necessarily going to be able to have a crystal ball and predict perfectly. What can combat that? It's having more picks. It's having a higher volume. I mean, it's just like, whenever you have a raffle or something along those lines, you want more cracks at it, right? And that's really where that, a big part of that comes from. But to bring it back to what you were talking about in terms of just the general confidence, when you're picking 14th, I mean, this is clearly a part of the draft. The Ravens haven't picked in this area of the draft a whole lot here in recent years. So it's going to be fascinating. Clearly, they have a number of positions where they could go with their first 2 or 3 picks. When you talk about all the picks they have in the first 4 rounds, really, if you extend it out. So it leads to lots of possibilities. I think it makes it difficult to really hone in on who they're going to pick. I think right now they probably have an idea, 5, 6, 7 players that they think, one of them will be there at 14. And, you have a weird year because there's not really that consensus quarterback prospects that everyone are just gaga over. So, it leads to a little more volatility in that way. But I think you're right. Overall, I mean, this is a team that they don't draft perfectly every year. No one does. But over the long haul, they're a team that understands the draft and really gets what it's all about. So, you go through the combine, you go through the pro days. They'll bring their guys in for visits. They're very good about not leaking that information too much. Although there are times where they want to leak information, that can be tactical as well. But I think it's just it's a process that they know is really important to their long-term roster building, especially knowing that whenever you pay Lamar Jackson, assuming you pay Lamar Jackson, whether it's now later this offseason, next offseason, 2 years from now, and then using a tag. Any of those different possibilities that we talked about and will continue to talk about until there's a name on the dotted line in a long-term contract. You know how important these picks are then, because you're going to be in a position starting this year where he's going to be making $23 million at the very least. And that's if he doesn't get a long-term deal to give yourself a little bit of wiggle room in the short term. But these cap numbers are going to be huge for him moving forward. So what does that mean? You've got to be even better drafting football players and finding good value. So that's part of the deal. And we saw in the Joe Flacco post Super Bowl era, they had a little more difficulty with that. You know, they had some Matt Elam, Arthur Brown, Rashad Perriman kind of picks, and
Sergio
that does
Kindle,
set you back.
don't forget him. I mean, I know he never really stood up straight, but you talk about guys.
Sure.
You know, we didn't get a draft pick that year, pretty much, right?
Right. But I was talking more so on the back end of Super Bowl 47, where, but you're right. A 2010 pick, he was essentially their first round pick. I mean, of course, they traded out, but
I never thought about that. He would have been on the Super Bowl team had he just walked straight, had he not fallen down. You know, he would have been in that era and been a player. Yeah.
I mean, that's really what this comes down to. I mean, you draft guys not just for that season; it's for the next 2, 3, 4 years. And if it's a guy that's a great player, you're talking about giving him a second contract. So, you know, when you miss on a draft pick, it might not even kill you or hurt you that much that year, but it's really the next year, 2 years, 3 years down the line. And I think that's kind of what we saw. I mean, Ed Reed, Ray Lewis, all those guys, Anquan Bolden, they move on post Super Bowl 47. And then you kind of look around and you say, well, Sergio Kindle didn't help them out. You know, Terrence Cody was a second round pick and didn't help them out a whole lot. You had the Elam Arthur Brown draft. You had Perriman a couple years after that. And yeah, then you kind of look at it and say, yeah, the Ravens had some 8-8 underwhelming kind of teams through that era. And, you know, Joe Flacco got a big part of the blame there.
But too, the Florida State, they couldn't play safety. Terrence
Brooks. I mean, he was a third round pick. Right, sure.
First, second, and third round picks, when those guys never get on the field, right?
Yeah.
That is,
it hurts.
That's troubling. It's problematic. It's one thing to see John Simon run around with another team, or worse yet, best yet, I should say, when Ryan Jensen or Rick Wagner or Kelechi Osemele or any of those guys go other places. To your point, there's compensation involved in all of those players that we could go through and say, that's how they got Dennis Pitta. That's how they got Ed Dixon. That's how they got fourth round picks, whoever, Mark Andrews, right? Like those are the picks you cash in on. And I mean, even Matt Judon, right? I mean, how much tread they got on him.
No question. And I mean, Matt Judon and Yannick Ngakoue, they'll have compensatory picks for those two. And, you know, I mean, certainly we can sit here and debate, you know, whether you re-sign those guys. Why didn't they necessarily, you know, why didn't someone like Ngakoue blossom more under the Ravens? Came in October. I mean, you know, how much of that just you chalk up to didn't have a full off season, didn't really fit in. Maybe it wasn't a great scheme fit. Yeah. I mean, you know, it's just, you have all of that, but everything we just said, this is so much about filling gaps. I mean, the Ravens know who their quarterback's going to be. They know who their tight end's going to be. They assume J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. And maybe you take, I mean, I think there's an argument to be made to take a running back early day 3, you know, to kind of keep that talent pool going. They know who their wide receivers are going to be. You know who your right guard's going to be. You hope you know who your left tackle is going to be, but you're just trying to fill in as many gaps as you can. And the draft's huge about that. And, you know, going back to what we were just talking about, when you miss on those early picks, it puts that much more pressure to find a Brandon Williams or find a Rick Wagner or find a Ryan Jensen or find a Matt Judon. You go down those later picks. Now you're depending on them to fill bigger roles instead of hitting on your early picks. And then those later picks are what turn a good draft into a great draft. So, you know, Bradley Bozeman being another recent example of that, a guy who was a late round pick and becomes a multi-year starter for you. So, you know, it's all part of the process, and you're not going to keep everybody, but, you know, when you're talking about the combine, you're looking for that value. And, you know, I mean, there's a lot made about who you talk to, who you don't talk to. And I don't pay that much attention to that. I think for the most part, you talk to anyone that you have any semblance of interest in, and you might be a little more secretive, like Lamar Jackson a few years back, for example. But, you know, you talk to a lot of players, and sometimes it's you're interested in them, or sometimes you're interested in one of their teammates and you find out some intel from a teammate, draft prospects, multiple guys from the same team. So, it's part of a linked process. They try to make it as much about science as possible in terms of data. And I mean, they have so much more player tracking data, not just what they test at the combine, but throughout the course of the college football season, even. So you have all that. But at the end of the day, there's still a lot of art involved. There's still a lot of unknown. There's still certain elements about a player that you're not going to have a full idea of, and certain elements of that player's life that is going to be unforeseen, whether it's, family hardship, whatever it might be. So makes it fun. And if all these guys turned out exactly the way you thought, it wouldn't be as interesting. So everyone's always looking to find the next Tom Brady or, whoever, take whatever late round pick that becomes a Hall of Famer. You're always looking for those stories, but generally speaking, those are going to be the exceptions. And that's why you want to do your homework to really nail those top 100 picks or so come April.
All right, so it just got real to me, okay? I just Googled while we're talking, because I haven't done this ahead of time. We were in Indy last week. I know all this. But the Ravens have all of these picks chunked right around 100, right? Like they have a stack of picks. So they pick 14th. Mm-hmm. We'll pick 15 players and say they'll get one of those guys, right? And you say there's 4 or 5 guys they target. Wherever those guys are, they should be able to get one of their guys. I joked with Eric DeCosta a couple weeks ago about, Ed Reed being the only guy left, and they picked him, that can happen. But when you pick 14th, you have a pretty good idea what you're doing. Then they pick 45th. And then it gets interesting. 76, that's a third-round pick, and then they start getting subs. They have 99, 108, 117, 126, and 138. So really, once they get up into the third round, which, I guess that second night, it starts to get kind of juicy, and then early morning on Saturday to get juicier. 99, 108, 117, 126. I mean, they're making a pick every 10 picks for a whole round, pretty much. I mean, that is an area, if you go back and do the math on the Mark Andrews and do the numbers on where Matt Judon was and do the numbers on where Marshall Yanda was, any of those guys, those are good numbers. 99, 108, 117, 126. That's a lot of swings at the point in the draft. Those aren't 178, 201, 204, which we've had some of those too. These are ones where you've swung before and wound up getting players that have made a lot of money in this league. So looking at it that way with Eric DeCosta's acumen, not Les Snead or not Dan Snyder's organization or some other organizations where they don't move around, they don't take picks. This is why Eric makes moves and sends half-ass kickers to Minnesota to bilk them for 6th-round draft picks and different stuff when we're half asleep, right? A lot of these deals happen at the end of August in the same way that this week is just an enormous week to clear space for roster positions. And this is going to be an ugly week around the league. A lot of Alejandro Villanuevas are going to find themselves on the pavement this week, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to find a ton of that. I think you're going to see the handful of franchise tags that are used. Early Monday morning, Adam Schefter, tweets out that Orlando Brown's going to get the tag, which not surprising considering what Kansas City gave up to get him right around, not too long ago, about a year ago at this time. I guess it was a little bit closer to the draft. It got into April, but it's important to go back to something you mentioned about all those picks. You kind of look at what their 4th-round inventory is.
8 picks in the top 138. 8 picks in the top 138.
Right. But you get into that 4th round, a couple things come to mind. Yes, that's still an area of the draft where most years, and Eric has said this at the pre-draft press conference, they'll kind of go through and say how many draftable players they think they have, and usually it's somewhere in the neighborhood 125, 150. Sometimes it's a little bit on the higher end, but the idea is, you're hoping you're still able to take a number of guys that you had ranked in your top 120, let's say.
By the way, I love that they
or top 100.
And we will talk and we'll kiss their asses right on up till the point where they pick the next Sergio Kindle or the next Ray Lewis, right? Whatever it is. But I love that they look at situations and say, we can't take that guy. Because as a guy that's interviewed people, there were people here that the minute they walked through, I didn't care what they knew about sports, how their bench press was. They weren't going to work in my building. They weren't going to be on my team. And there's a point for them to take the Frosty Ruckers and to take the guys that don't have clean drafts. I use him as a great example of a guy that they always thought that was a bad dude. And draft when you go in, say we're going to take a chance on that guy's got some off the field issues, that guy was kind of a jerk at Alabama, we don't really want him around here, although we know that's not a problem because they took Marlon Humphrey. But this is part of them saying that guy's not a Raven. And I don't know that every team does that. I think teams put boards together, but I think if a second rounder falls into the fourth round and it's the first time you've ever drafted and you're not Eric DeCosta sitting in there for 30 years doing it this way, you're more inclined to make a mistake, right? I mean, and the Ravens have made mistakes, and we're still beating them up Rashad Perryman and Matt Elam and all that. But there is something about, like, we don't like that. We don't like that person. We don't want that person in here. Not everybody that's in the draft is a guy that we would want on our football team. And I think that that's an important thing that they determine, that I'm not sure that is the way it's done other places.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's done that way most places at this point. I think now, if you have a character question guy, what's your level of tolerance? Is it a case of this kid did something dumb at age 16, but it wasn't something malicious? How does it franchise A view that compared to franchise B compared to franchise C? So you'll have some of that. But yeah, I mean, every team's going to have their medical red flags. Every team's going to have character flags. But to your point, if you are in a position where you have a guy that you weren't comfortable with him at this portion of the draft as a result, if he is available to you later on, what do? Do you stay true to that, to the idea that we're not drafting this guy? Or is it tempting because it is better value, it is less of a risk when you take them later on? Does that change? And every team's got to weigh that. I mean, you can have medical red flags or medical question marks where you say, okay, we're not going to take that guy in the first or second round, but my goodness, if he's sitting there at the end of the fourth with a compensatory pick that we have, then that changes. I mean,
you drop him down your board to 110th, you'd say, okay,
right, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, right. But a perfect example, a guy, Pernell McPhee, who has had a nice long career, and I'm guessing this is probably going to be it for him, given where he is at this point now, a decade plus in the league. But he was a 5th round pick. I can tell you right now, the Ravens absolutely, just from a talent player grade standpoint, they had a higher grade on him, but there were some questions about his knee, and that made him a 5th round pick. And clearly other teams felt that way about him, that he wasn't taken earlier. So you have so much of that. But one thing I want to go back to in terms of you mentioning these picks right around, late 90s into the early 100s, that 4th round area, late 3rd and into the 4th round, that end of day 2, early, lots of action early on the final day of the draft. A couple things come to mind. One, like we said, volume of picks gives you a chance to take more swings. If you do have a ton of draftable players, then great. You can take swings and come away with that. And you're going to be really excited about it. But I also will remind 2016, they had 5 4th round picks. They were Tavon Young, Chris Moore, Alex Lewis, Willie Henry, and Kenneth Dixon. Tavon Young, if not for the injuries, you would have loved that pick entirely, unconditionally. Still turned out to be a good pick, you would say, for a 4th rounder. The rest of those guys, not so much. So sometimes it doesn't, as much as you have designs on.
You say that, but Alex Lewis started and got injured and then started with the Jets after that. So he wasn't like a bust. I mean, he wasn't a bust,
but it's not a pick you go back and celebrate either. My point is, you had those 5 guys, and Chris Moore was a good special teams player for a few years, but the point is, at the time, there's a lot of excitement. People saying, wow, this could be a historic 4th round of drafting 5 guys. And it ended up not being that much. But my point is, when you do have picks in that area of the draft, other teams will look at those with some value, right? We're not talking about 6th and 7th round throwaway picks, which they're throwaway picks. I mean, at this point, I don't think the Ravens even have that much interest in drafting guys in the 7th round most years. So
they'd rather wait for free agents and pick their players.
Yeah, right, exactly. But when you have that many picks in that portion of the draft, yes, it can be the volume play, like I just mentioned, or you have some scenarios where someone that you had graded 25th on your board is suddenly sitting there in the 2nd round, or maybe he's fallen all the way to the 3rd round for some reason. You have an opportunity to move a couple of those picks to be aggressive to move up if you want to. So it's capital.
Or the other way around.
You can move back and collect more
supplementals picks. Or supplementals, are you stuck with this?
Yeah. It started a couple years back. You can deal compensatory picks.
Yeah, when you couldn't deal them, it was different. Now all of a sudden, somebody may offer you next year's 3rd for a low 4 because they got a player they want, and this organization will do that. This organization would say, yeah, I'll take an extra 3 next year, or I'll take a whatever. And I think it's another part of Eric and the value and the depth of the organization is that they're much more willing to, on the clock. A lot of times we've sat out there with the purple bird and watched the change, and not just to Lamar Jackson, right? The other way around too, where they have a flexibility built into this, especially with this many picks, that they're just good at doing this. They're really good at doing this. And for that, I it makes it more fun to be a Raven fan that they're good at this.
Yeah, and I mean, they value draft capital, and there are lots of different ways to value that. And I would even say, as much as we poke fun at Les Snead, who we're not really poking fun because, hey, they just won the Super Bowl. They're the geniuses. It worked for them, and it worked beautifully for them. But you want to have that draft capital, and you can use it in a variety of ways. You can trade 1st-round picks for established Pro Bowl talent, and they can help you win a Super Bowl. You can take those use those 1st-round picks, and you hope you're drafting future Pro Bowl players, or you can move around the draft board. One thing that I think they've done a really nice job the last couple of years is not getting too caught up in the sunk costs. If there's a 4th-round pick, like Ben Bredesen, for example, it was pretty evident. I think they knew his first training camp that he wasn't going to be a guy for them. He hung around for a year, and then they dealt him the following preseason. So, I think
same thing with the kid from New England. They got value for the British kid from New England, right?
Yeah. I mean, in most cases, it's very marginal. It's not going to be something that's going to change your franchise. But understanding draft capital can be used in a number of ways, including after you've taken a player in the draft, and then you say, you know what? This isn't going to work. Instead of piddling around for 2 more years, hoping this guy figures it out, we're going to basically give ourselves a mulligan. We'll deal him to another team who liked him, whether it was this year or the year before that he was drafted. And, they've done that and recouped some original picks. Now, it doesn't mean you do cartwheels over it, but it means, hey, we didn't waste 3 years with the guy. We didn't waste money. We didn't waste developmental energy in him. And we get a mulligan for that pick a year from now. That's how they viewed some of these guys recently. And you see how it plays out in the long term. These are all long-term plays. The 14th overall pick, yeah, you want them to play this year. You want them to be a big part of what you do. 2nd-round pick in a perfect world, sure. 3rd round, maybe. But beyond that, these are long-term picks. These are long-term commodities that you're trying to see if some value will appreciate. And you take a guy in the 4th round that becomes a starter for you a year or 2 down the road. And if you have that, then that just makes your draft process that much more successful.
He is Luke Jones. All of it brought to you by our friends at Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast. I'm going to get my Rofo back in my Cole Roofing mug whenever I find it. I'm unboxing and deboxing here. Spring cleaning, as it were. We're going to be over at El Guapo on Thursday from 1 to 4. We got great guests, by the way. You're going to like this, Luke. We got Jane Miller, and we have Rob Roblin coming by. I've never had Rob Roblin on the show. I'm looking forward to that. Damien Adarty's going to stop by. We're going to have some nachos. We're going to have some crab balls. We're going to have some fun. I might even have some rice and beans and a margarita and a hubcap. Who knows before it's all over. Had a great time at Mama's on the Half Shell. You'll hear all those conversations with my pal Greg Zapaniak, as he would say, and Martin Knott, as well as Jen Fideli. And Jill Eisenberg came down to promote multiple sclerosis. And my sister-in-law battles that disease. And my friend Dave Johnson broadcaster with the Wizards, and we lost my friend Frank Vanek, so we talked a lot about multiple sclerosis this week, so you can check that out. Also, later on, and maybe this is you, Luke, maybe this is the day I get you out for a crab cake, because you Pennsylvania guys don't eat crab cakes the right way. Maybe get you down to Costas on the 18th. There's basketball that day. It's March Madness Friday. We'll be there from 2 until 5 in Dundalk at Costas Inn. Come on down. That's next week. And then on the 23rd, we're back at Fadley's in the morning from 9 until noon. Don's putting together some big guests for that. So the Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by the Maryland Lottery. We're letting ourselves play. We're getting back out on the road. Story for you, Luke. I gotta give this story, then I gotta take a break. I went to Mama's on the Half Shell Friday, gave out a bunch of Betty Boop. If I had him in my bag, I'd hold him a Betty Boop scratch-off cards. So this is Friday. I give cards away. I go do my business. I work all day Saturday. Sunday, I was picking my wife up at the airport. I'm like, I'm going to get out of Chaucer, and I'm going to get a beer, and I'm going to get some sushi because they have delicious sushi, 5 o'clock on Friday nights. So I go in. My sushi chef's there. I'm like, get me the Oreo roll. Oreo roll? You like that? Crunchy? So I sit down, and there's 3 really pretty girls at the bar. And, I'm intimidated by pretty girls, being old married like I am. And the girl turns to me, and she says, hey. She didn't call me Mr., which I'm appreciative of, because I did shave and look young. Hey, I met you Friday. I'm like, really? You're a pretty girl. I would have remembered you. She's like, no, you gave me a Betty Boop lottery ticket and I won. And I'm like, what? How is that possible? I got to get a picture with you. So I took a picture with her and her girlfriends, and I'm going to put it up today. She won $2, and she was wondering whether she was going to pay it forward and get another ticket or not, which is always the issue when you win $2. But I did get a winner, so there, have at it. People really win. It's the Maryland Lottery. Let yourself play. I'm Nestor. He's Luke. We are WNST. Stick with us. We got an excellent week of fun and conversation ahead here. All of it brought to you by our friends at Wise Markets. We call them Wise Conversations. You call it BaltimorePositive.com.